And welcome everybody, slowly but surely. You'll see, hopefully everybody sees in the background there is a presentation. This is just going to filter through some photos, and we're going to give it a few minutes as folks join.
Be interesting to see some of these people in real life. In years past, we saw them all in training, but we did so much virtual stuff this year. So while we're waiting, I'll introduce myself. I'm Skip Stiles, Executive Director of Wetlands Watch, and let me give you. Oh, somebody's not on mute. So if you could mute when you're not talking, unless you want your dog to be part of the webinar. As I said, I'm Skip Stiles with Wetlands Watch, and the phone app grew out of some work that we were doing with local governments back in 2013, I guess it was, and we found that a lot of at that point, nearly all of the localities were hurting for information about where it actually flooded. They knew, okay, that intersection floods, but they didn't know where all the intersections were, all the street segments were. They didn't know the extent of the impact. And so in 2014, we got a small grant and tried to see if we could develop a phone app that would allow citizen scientists to actually go out and collect real-time information about where the flooding was occurring in ways that local governments, emergency planners, transportation planners, all the people who at that time were just scratching their heads about what seemed to be increased flooding and sea level rise, so that they could do some planning. And so we got, like I said, we got a small grant. We found an IT company here in Norfolk, Concursive, and put together the app and was sort of beta testing it. We used it up and down the East Coast from Florida to Maine, or to Cape Cod during Hurricane Joaquin. And we're basically just punking along, trying to find uses, applications, interest in it. And then Dave Mayfield, who's also on this call, who at that time was the environmental reporter for the Virginian Pilot, came up with this brilliant idea of trying to get a bunch of people out on the projected highest tide of the year to do mapping and sort of turn it into an event. And Dave still has plans for a much larger event than we have now. But he got the Virginian Pilot, and then the Daily Press, and then WHRO, and then all of the local TV media outlets to push this Catch the King event, Catch the King Tide. And so in 2017, then he brought Derek and the VIMS folks in because he had been, I guess, you can correct me about the path on this, Dave, but he knew that that VIMS was doing this really cool flood modeling. And so Derek and later Karen came into the core group as well. And we were off to the races, and in 2017, we kicked the thing off. It was at that time mostly this part of Hampton Roads, because that's where the most activity was and where we had the trainings and the rest. And that was the year that we had, how many did we kick out that year, Derek? 700 and some mappers, wasn't it?
Yeah, we had 718 officially through the app. Then we had two other ways that people could upload data as well, like through a US. I guess we had a couple of different crowdsourcing maps through ArcGIS Online as well that people used. That Guinness World Records was able to count all of those as GPS high water marks, but about 88% of our data came from the sea level rise app that year.
Yeah. Well, and then we were just floored by the numbers of people who showed up and the amount of data that was collected. So Derek went and piled that up and found found some odd category in the Guinness record book, and sure enough, we got the Guinness in the Guinness record book for what was the category, Derek? What category did you find?
We are the world's largest environmental survey. It's measured in terms of people and the period of time. So we collected, I think, nearly 60,000 GPS high water marks in a 6-hour period of time.
Yeah. So that was the start of it, and then we brought WHRO in as a sort of a deeper partner, and in subsequent years they kicked in with another program they developed, standards of learning compliant high school environmental curriculum that worked around the app, and then they got some foundation funding to basically run a contest where they were awarding cash prizes to high schools that participated in that high school curriculum and collected data. So we began to, through WHRO, we began to expand this into the high schools, and we actually have plans to go back out and do more of that. They've updated the SOL standards for the environmental education piece of this. And then Dave Mayfield somehow ran into the Girl Scouts, and the Girl Scouts have become part of our group as well. We met with them a couple times. Dave, like I said, got us hooked up with them. They're very interested in making this part of their citizen science badge for the Girl Scouts, and there have been a number of Girl Scouts participating over the last couple of years. We're looking at trying to expand it farther within the Colonial Coast Council of the Girl Scouts, which runs from Gloucester to Ocracoke, and basically from the coast over to the fall line, over to 95. And they're pre-COVID, there were 10,000 scouts, Girl Scouts, and guardians, adult guardians, and parents involved. So we're sort of on the cusp of expanding into that realm. And then we've established partnerships with a whole bunch of other folks. With Karen's help, we've hooked up with a master naturalist and are looking to expand that relationship as well. So the whole Catch the King effort has been moving along quite well, and this year we finally came out of the COVID doldrums, and so we're looking to expand it even farther. And the biggest gain of all, and at this point I will hand it off, has been to hire a full-time coordinator, outreach person, who most of you probably dealt with, Gabi, Kinney, who came to us early last year. So Gabi will be the master of ceremonies here. And before we go much farther, I do have to recognize the people who've helped us over the years. Right, we got some tremendous support from the Environmental Defense Fund that allowed us both to hire Gabi and also to update the app, a process that's still in, or a piece of progress that's still in process. In years past, we've gotten strong support from the Hampton Road Sanitation District, and also from AECOM, which is a contractor for HRSD. So, and then we also received some funding from Rutgers at one point to update the app. The Jacques Cousteau National Estuarine Research Center at Rutgers provided some funding. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Gabi, and I guess that's what I'm supposed to do, and have her take it from here.
Absolutely. Yeah, we were, hey everybody, first of all, my name is Gabi. Skip gave me a pretty good intro. I am the newest member of Wetlands Watch, and I am their outreach manager. So I work a lot with the Sea Level Rise app, helping coordinate volunteers and hopefully take the app to new heights. Skip mentioned our partnership with the Girl Scouts through Dave Mayfield and perhaps making this event much larger than it has been in the past. So hi, everybody. Thanks to everyone for being here and everybody who participated. I really appreciate so many people on the call. First of all, that's wonderful. And I believe the next thing on our agenda was just to run through some introductions. So that's me. I'm Gabi, and I'll go ahead and pass it along to Dave Mayfield.
Thank you, Gabi. I am Dave Mayfield, retired environmental reporter for the Virginian Pilot. I had the good fortune of having as among my best sources during the time that I was at the Pilot, Skip Stiles and Derek Loftis. Every time I thought about something related to sea level rise, those are the two guys I thought of first when I needed to get some information quick. And they were also the first two folks that I turned to when I came up with this crazy idea of getting lots of folks together on one day potentially to use this app that I was aware of to go out and measure the tides. And it was just a wonderful confluence of events and enthusiasms. And just need to make a quick shout out to a couple of people from the Pilot with whom this never would have been possible. Steve Gunn, former editor at the Pilot, and Sam Hunley, who created that wonderful logo. He's an artist who I think it just has immense talent, and I think it really helped give the project a lift that we really needed. And so anyways, it's just been so wonderful to see so many people come together. I think we're north of 1,500 folks now who've at some time over the last 6 years have gone out and measured. And, it's just so gratifying to see the enthusiasm that you all have shown for the event. So thank you very much. And I don't know who we turn to next.
Karen, you can go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Karen Duhring. I'm a coastal scientist at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, or VIMS. I've been a Catch the King training instructor and tide captain for the past 5 years, working with Skip and Dave and Derek and others, mostly supporting Northern Neck and Middle Peninsula teams to expand the geographic coverage of the mapping beyond the Hampton Roads, Norfolk area. Thank you so much for all of you being here tonight to be part of this community science project and to allow us an opportunity to express our appreciation for your involvement. And next, I'll turn it over to Derek.
Thank you, Karen. I'm Derek Loftis. I'm a research professor at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science within their Center for Coastal Resources Management. And I work with Karen along with many others in the center there to help develop hydrodynamic models that help us predict flooding in different places. So when Dave Mayfield first reached out to me and came up with this idea with the support of his managing editor, Steve Gunn, over at the Virginian Pilot back in 2017, we were really thrilled about the opportunity to be able to not just produce these forecasts, but actually have a way to have them validated. Skip was kind enough to share with me back in 2014 some of the work that he had been developing with the inaugural version of the Sea Level Rise app, back in Hurricane Arthur that happened nearly a decade ago now. Testing that in the Hague of Norfolk. And, it's really cool to see that you can get a handful of people in neighborhoods that heuristically have a lot of background understanding of where flooding happens. But to be able to see that on a map and kind of cross-reference which areas that our model needs some improvements, and in other places where maybe cities have started to do some storm drainage mitigation efforts to try and increase our subsurface storage facilities and capabilities to, displace this water somewhere else. Those types of things are interesting for us to try and make the model match realities as best as possible. And so your continued data collection through the Sea Level Rise app developed by Wetlands Watch really helps us in a lot of different ways. So thank you for helping make this, 6th year of Catch the King since 2017 become so successful.
Thanks, Derek. We can pass it over to Margie, Dr. Margaret Mulholland.
Unmute and show myself. Hi, I'm not doing my talk now, right?
No, just an intro.
Yeah. Okay, so I've been a professor at ODU since 2000, an extra 0 and less 1, 2. And I've been in the Ocean and Earth Sciences department. And when we started beta testing the phone app with Skip and our kids, we noticed a lot of stuff in the water. So we developed a project to take advantage of Catch the King that would also measure water quality impacts from coastal flooding. And we've been doing it since the inaugural Catch the King event in 2017. So really excited to be able to share some of these results. All these results have been put into a dissertation by Alfonso Macias Tapia, who's been a graduate student at ODU, a PhD student. He is now a Knaus Fellow up in NOAA in their education division. So really excited about that he's landed on his feet and gotten a job, and his work is taking center stage in a lot of places. So thanks.
Thank you. Very exciting. That's awesome. We had one more presenter, Tom Allen from ODU. I'm just going to double check and make sure see if he's on the call. I don't think I've seen him join yet, but we'll get started without him in case he's a face. Yeah, I don't see his name. All right. Well, hopefully he joins us later to present on Measure the Muck. But we'll turn it over to kind of the main appreciation slideshow. So this is kind of the bulk, and will be kind of a 30-minute section. We're going to try to get through it. You'll honestly hear me talk a lot, so hopefully I can make it interesting for you guys. And on this first slide here, you'll notice we have a whole bunch of logos at the bottom. Skip's already mentioned quite a few of them, but I want to recognize them again. We have quite a few sponsors for Catch the King, the Environmental Defense Fund, AECOM, WHRO, and HRSD, and then of course our lovely partners who have already introduced themselves from VIMS and ODU. Just a big old thank you to all of those groups for helping us coordinate, bring in volunteers, and all of that good stuff. And Dave also mentioned this beautiful King Tide logo here on the right. It's kind of become the face of Catch the King, so we're lucky to have that graphic, which is pretty awesome. So Karen is actually going to start with some special recognitions in the Northern Neck and Middle Peninsula area. They are our rock stars for Catch the King, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about those, the results of that region a little bit later, but Karen had some special recognition for that area. So Karen, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Gabi. Before I get into the mapper recognitions, I first want to acknowledge that all community science projects like this one must have a dedicated project coordinator. So the very first special recognition I want to give is for you, Gabi, the new Wetlands Watch Outreach Manager and Catch the King Coordinator. Thank you so much for your willingness to hit the ground running, learn about past Catch the King events, and keeping us organized as a group. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure all of you will agree with me that we're very lucky to have Gabi's enthusiasm and pleasant demeanor working for us and Catch the King. So the next special recognition tonight goes out to all the mappers who are Virginia Master Naturalists and Extension Master Gardeners. And they came from several coastal regions in coastal Virginia. These are all public service volunteers. They are positive, trusted influencers in their local communities. And so your participation and your unique position to share what you've learned through this project makes a big impact for this group, this whole effort. So you have a lot of choices for volunteering your time. And we are really appreciative and thank you for choosing Catch the King as a cause worth volunteering for. Next slide, please. Now we'd like to give special recognition to the Northern Neck and Middle Peninsula mappers. But first, a lot of people ask me, exactly where is that in Virginia? So here's a map. The Northern Neck is located between the Potomac and Rappahannock rivers, with 4 major counties there. And the Middle Peninsula is located between the Rappahannock and the York Rivers. So just wanted to orient those of you who may not be as familiar with our part of coastal Virginia. Next slide. The Northern Neck Shoreline Evaluation Program is a group of Master Gardener volunteers who provide community education about many things, including shorelines and flooding. This group organized themselves into 4 mapping teams and even recruited and trained new mappers, working through a very brand new process with the updated app. The 4 county team leaders deserve special recognition for their persistence to make their 4th Catch the King community science event better than before. And this includes Mary Turville, Ian Shin, Jeff Evans, and Carol Martin. Thank you all and all of your team members. Next slide. On the Middle Peninsula, mappers included volunteers from the Middle Peninsula Master Naturalists, and I'm the chapter advisor for this group. Susan Crockett and Rose Sullivan drove 65 miles to catch the king tide at 4 public landings. John Powell and Bill Blair were with me at VIMS. They successfully mapped the VIMS shorelines at our Gloucester Point campus, while my phone just froze up. So I was lucky to have them there. Another master naturalist, Dave Harlan, mapped at the New State Park for the first day and then drove 45 minutes away on day 2 to map his usual sites in Matthews County. Amy Baker is a new member to our mapping team, and she joined the Matthews mappers, and along with veteran mapper and local high school teacher Jody Rudder, expanded coverage and data points in this part of the Middle Peninsula region. So I'd like to thank all of those mappers, but I really want to put out a special round of thanks to all 29 mappers from the Northern Neck and Middle Peninsula for your participation. And now I'll turn it back over to Gabi.
Thank you, Karen. And yes, thank you all so very much. We had a lot of really great activity, a lot of new mappers this year. I especially think it's great that so many people are willing to get their feet wet for the Commonwealth. It's really awesome to see such a widespread citizen science mapping event, and I truly think it's only up from here. So thank you, Karen, for that special recognition. It's awesome. So to kick off this section, we're going to kind of go region by region. We had CTK regions all across the Tidewater area and into the Northern Neck. So we're going to go region by region and recognize the top 3 mappers in each region. The top 2, and I'm explaining this now so I don't have to do it every slide. The top 2 mappers will receive a Catch the King t-shirt. If anybody hasn't seen these yet, they're pretty awesome. They have a Catch the King logo on the front and some cool stuff on the back. So every top 2 mapper will receive a t-shirt as well as some stickers. So if you do see your name in the top 2 on these slides, please feel free to, or please do, email me with your t-shirt size and the best way to get it to you. I believe we could probably mail them or coordinate some sort of meetup so we can trade those off. So just a general thank you. And my email will be at the end of the slide for anyone who did receive an award. So we'll start. Karen went over this a tiny bit, but our top mapping stats, we had 131 participants overall, so that's pretty darn awesome. Especially after COVID and all of that, kind of gearing up new mapping teams was certainly proving difficult, and so to see so many people out there is really awesome. Almost 15,000 pins were dropped, geographical pins, and I'll talk a little bit more later on how you can view that data, and Derek will also go over some of that data analysis as well. The average pin dropped per participant was 112. I think that's pretty awesome. That's a solid like half hour of mapping out there. So way to go, guys. Most pins drop. I wanted to highlight Marianne Keeley, 983 pins in Virginia Beach. This skyrockets the amount of pins of an individual. So Marianne, you will absolutely get a t-shirt and some stickers, and we'll recognize you again a little bit later in the Virginia Beach region. So congratulations and thank you. Karen also very generously recognized the Northern Neck and the Middle Peninsula. And I want to thank Karen for her coordination efforts there too. She really put some teams together and helped coordinate those and made sure that we had their feedback on how the event went for them. So congratulations to the Northern Neck and Middle Peninsula for not only being the region with the most pins, but also the most participants, 29 people. So thank you for all of those efforts up there. And we can officially say that the king tide not only came, but it was caught. It's funny because I can't hear anybody laughing at that, but I'm going to hope there was a couple chuckles in there. So we'll start with the Northern Neck. Again, 29 participants, 3,600 pins. Top mappers, Ian Shane, 376 pins. Joe Del Rudder, 320 pins. And John Powell, 316 pins. And then each slide, I wanted to kind of take some screenshots from the Sea Level Rise app just to show some of the data that was collected and how you can view it. These are viewable through the app to anybody who's joined the particular event. So anybody who has access to a CTK region and the CTK 2022 event can see these mapping photos. I also wanted to pinpoint the quality of the data that was collected. So you can see how tight-knit these pins are dropped. We had some technological issues throughout the day and throughout the weekend, but we really got some really great high quality data collection, especially in the Northern Neck. So really great job there, guys. Next up is Norfolk, 22 people, 2,275 pins. Top mappers, Robin Franklin, 252 pins. Eliza Lewis, 241 pins. And Betty Bauckham, 213 pins. So thank you to you guys for those efforts. Those are some pretty high pin dropping stats. So thanks for that. We had some good quality mapping in The Hague, a couple other boat ramps, and Mayflower Road, which is notorious to be a high flooding spot. And actually this year, what we've discovered with the app is that not only can we collect the pin data, but we also have that GPS satellite photo of the street that now Mayflower shows cars driving through water. Skip, I saw you come off mute there for a second. Did you want to say something?
I was going to say, this is one of those Google Earth things. The satellite came over and took a picture of Mayflower during one of its wet days. So the base map actually shows a car driving through the puddle that was mapped by the mapper the day of Catch the King. So it's sort of validation of the app, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So if anybody feels like exploring their events a little bit more and you see some more of these screenshots, feel free to send them our way. We think they're a pretty good example of how to map flooding in more ways than one. So in Virginia Beach, we had 17 participants, 2,274 pins. Marianne Keeley, 938 pins. Thank you again for that extensive effort. Lynn Eklund, 573 pins, also awesome. And Suzanne Hellstorm, 288 pins. Thank you guys so much. And you can see a good coverage and spread of pins on that map there. It's pretty awesome. And here's a couple photos. This stretch right here in the middle, amazing data set, super close, tight knit, looks awesome. And a couple more on the coast. Chesapeake, 12 participants, 1,700 pins. Tricia Sands, 246 pins. Laura May, 213 pins. And Bob Harkins, 143 pins. Thank you all so very much. Here's some of that data as well. One of the cool things too that seems to crop up this year is we got a little bit more mapping on private property areas, which is really great because we can't access that data. And a lot of researchers can't access that data on a regular basis. So one of the great things that the app serves is gathering that private property data. So it looks like quite a few folks did map their backyards, their neighborhoods. So that data is so great. And if you know anybody who has regular flooding in their backyards, see if we can get them involved with the app. It'd be awesome. York County and Poquoson, 13 people participated, 1,000 pins. Richard Decker with 274 pins, Helen Dries with 264 pins, and Alan Sheeler with 179 pins. Thank you guys so much. Couple boat ramps there, good coastlines. Williamsburg and James City County, this is my neck of the woods. Total participants, 13, 1,000 pins. Cheryl Liu, 326 pins. Frank Polster, who is a leader in the Williamsburg area. Thank you so much, Frank, for all of your coordination efforts. 171 pins. And Judy Jones, 121 pins. Williamsburg is notorious for the Colonial Parkway, which has quite a bit of flooding, and Frank does a really great job getting some mapping teams to capture flooding on that Colonial Parkway. You can see here there's Sandy Bay, and they got a good couple spots on there, so great job with that. Hampton, we had 5 participants, 435 pins. Top mappers, Brian Barmore. Brian Barmore is also one of our Tide captains and does some really awesome coordination and volunteer recruitment with the master naturalist over there. I always get confused between masters and naturalists and gardeners, but they're all absolutely amazing. I was also invited to a training with the master naturalists there. So it was great to kind of interact with them. So thank you, Brian, for setting that up. I really appreciate it. And it was great to meet everybody. And Christy Gardner with 21 pins. So thank you guys for mapping Hampton for us. It's awesome. And in Suffolk, oh no, this one wasn't formatted as well. Suffolk, we had 3 participants, 345 pins, Carla Bangs, 193 pins, and Arabella Noel with 65 pins. And I received an email this morning that Arabella may or may not be joining us on the call, but I'm excited to announce she is a Girl Scout, and she is one of the top 2 mappers. So congratulations, Arabella. You will also be getting a t-shirt and stickers as a young scout. So thanks for participating and mapping out there. We really appreciate it. Newport News, we had 3 participants, 160 pins. Dave Mayfield, our very own, with 86 pins. I believe I got you a t-shirt already, but if you'd like another one, let me know. Ryan Mikulski, I hope I'm saying that correctly. McCluskey, 57 pins. I apologize if I ruined the name. And Christy Gardner again with 16 pins. I am thankful for everybody who mapped in Newport News. We only had 3 people out there, and clearly they're all shown here, but it was really good coverage. Here's a couple of the data sets. Little coastlines here and there, trouble spots. This is also actually probably a good time to mention trouble spots. If anybody's unfamiliar with the trouble spot function in the app, this is a really good example of a place that would be good to place a trouble spot pin. There's a function in the app where you don't have to do a full pin dropping of a coastline or an area that floods. You can just drop a single pin that notifies us of a regular flooding spot. And so these kinds of places where there's just a little bit of shoreline that floods, this would be a good place to return to and map consistently over time and see how that spot gets worse over time with flooding, or perhaps it gets better if a living shoreline is installed. I know Frank Polster did something similar in Williamsburg and showed us how a living shoreline improved the flooding in an area in Williamsburg. So that was really great. But yeah, trouble spots function. If you have any questions about it, feel free to email me. It looks like my formatting didn't quite cross over on this. I apologize, guys. Outside of Hampton Roads, we had 1 participant, Miss Karen Wolf, with 637 pins. I hope she's joining us today. I haven't checked to see if she is, but she is the sole mapper of Kiptopeke and Cape Charles out there in the Eastern Shore. So thank you so much, Karen, for being the sole mapper out there. Really awesome efforts and really great data collection. Really awesome set of GPS pins that I'm sure will be super beneficial to the data modeling. And the Measure the Muck team, this is Dr. Mulholland's team, did quite a few spots around Norfolk. 13 participants, 1,179 pins. Patrick Stiles with 266 pins. Eduardo Perez Vega with 181 pins. And Catherine Mogadas, 142 pins. So I don't think I've reached out to Measure the Muck personally, but Margie, if you don't mind reaching out to those folks and make sure that they get a t-shirt and some stickers, I'd be happy to pass those along. And they got some good data coverage around The Hague, a couple other ports, and Llewellyn. Actually, I did forget, I got this one other photo. Llewellyn Avenue is another big trouble spot, recurring flooding, and we got another picture of those cars driving right through the flooding on the street. So again, if you have any time to play with the app and seek out more of these screenshots, that would be awesome. And then this is kind of a wrap up of our coverage and our extension of partnerships. I just wanted to recognize the Girl Scouts again. They are really awesome. 7,000 girls from Southeast Virginia to Northeast North Carolina. And we're connecting with them through Dave. He helped us get involved with them, and we hope to kind of establish some more mapping teams in that area with those 7,000 girls. It'd be really awesome to establish some regular mapping teams, which we'll talk about a little bit more later as well. But they're a new partnership. This was their field part of their, I believe they have a citizen science badge. So they had a field activity component of it, as well as an educational component, with which us and a few of our presenters on the call today are going to go in person and work with the girls and talk a little bit more about the citizen science aspect of it. So really thankful for them and excited to continue that partnership. Friends of the Rappahannock also did some great work with us. They helped us create some maps up in the Northern Neck and Middle Peninsula region. And they also did a lot of really great advertisement for us. They had these really awesome social media kind of fact cards that they put out, which was really great. So if anybody from Friends of the Rappahannock is on the call, thank you so much for doing that. We had a few folks also tag us in some photos of their own mapping. So thank you to those if you're on the call. Really great photos. And then we had tons of news coverage. So 13 News Now, Virginian Pilot, 3 WTKR. Derek Loftis also got a feature on the Weather Channel. So thank you, Derek, for that and for the shout out to Wetlands Watch. That was really awesome. And I believe this is Wavy TV as well. They did a good spot on how to use the app. So we got pretty good coverage this year, and it was really awesome. And then to keep the momentum going and keep spreading the word, I'm sure that other folks who are presenting will share their social medias and things like that. But I'll drop some links in the chat a little bit later. We have a Facebook group called Help Catch the King Tide. If you're not part of it already, you can find us by just typing in Help Catch the King Tide on Facebook. That's where we post updates. We'll post updates leading up to the event, photos. You can share your own photos in there. So that's a really good spot if you're not already part of it. And then we have our Instagram account where we post reels. We posted a couple tutorial videos for the Sea Level Rise app this year. And so you can find those there, as well as we have a TikTok, which is awesome. So we do them on TikTok now too. But we'll always link them on Instagram. So if you haven't seen those yet, that would be a great spot. And we also have kind of a recap video of how the event went on TikTok. So you can find us at Wetlands Watch. And then one more big last thank you to Karen Duhring at VIMS, Derek Loftis at VIMS, Tom Allen at ODU, Margaret Mulholland with ODU, Dave Mayfield, and all of our Tide captains. We'll hear a little bit from our Tide captains later, but really just thank you all so much for helping coordinate this, welcoming me on board. This was a huge event that I was really excited to take on as the newest member of Wetlands Watch, and I'm just so thankful for such a strong and collaborative team. So thank you all so much for helping me out. And then I might put this on again later, but we have kind of a year-round mapping interest survey for you guys to fill out. So if you can scan this QR code with the camera on your phone, there's a couple questions, and there's also a chance to provide feedback on the Catch the King event if you haven't done so already. We'd love to hear from you to see how it went. We know there was a little bit of technological difficulty with the app, but in general, we just like to hear some feedback. So feel free to fill that box out. And then there's a few questions about if you're interested in doing some year-round mapping, other high tides and rainfall flooding. That's data coverage that we'd really love to get. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later as well. But feel free to scan that QR code. I'll leave it up for maybe 5 more seconds. Did it work, Derek? Cool. All right. And then Derek will also go over this a little bit more as well, but you can view the data in a couple different ways. So you can view the data right in the app inside your events. There's a button at the top once you click through to your event and tap pins. You'll be able to see a whole map of all the pins in your region and event. You can also visit, if you haven't already, the Sea Rising Solutions website. It's just www.searisingsolutions.com. And you sign in using the same sign-in you do in the app, and you can go in and view the data there as well. And then VIMS also has some modeling on their website, which Derek will go over in a little bit, but you can explore those maps as well and see how that data is being is helping validate flood models. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for participating. Again, if you saw your name in the top 2 on any of the regions, reach out to me at this email with your t-shirt size, as well as the best way to get a t-shirt and some stickers to you, and we'll coordinate that. So I'll leave that up on the screen for a few seconds in case anybody needs to write it down. And also, if you have any photos to share, please feel free to email me. We'll be posting things throughout the year and in our future outreach materials. So it'd be great to have a good slew of photos from flood mapping. All right. And then I believe next, let me double check. Next on the agenda is Derek, I believe.
Indeed. Thank you, Gabi.
Yeah.
So I wanted to start off before I begin my presentation, just thanking again all of the many avid volunteers that have helped us collect data over the years. I built this virtual background behind me, constructed from photos over 2020 and 2021, based on a lot of the data that you've helped us collect, as many of these are images that were posted either to the Facebook group or directly collected within the Sea Level Rise app. So it's really been kind of exciting to be able to show you all the different cool things that we've been able to do with the data that you've collected. And so that's really kind of what my presentation is all about here. So let me go on ahead and pull that up and get started. So the title of this presentation is basically just how your GPS flood monitoring data is used for modeling. And I say used loosely because in some ways it's used to help us validate the accuracy of those models, but data in their own right can also become their own model. So slowly over time, as you collect enough data, as we kind of showed earlier, and as you'll see in my presentation, the Sea Level Rise app has been around since 2014, and we're getting close to a decade worth of data that you can start to build on a decadal scale. Some information related to where common places that have been flooded in the past are starting to show some changes in terms of how far inland the flooding is happening during these tidal flooding events. We've gotten some media recognition, and Gabi's covered quite a few of these, but over the last 6 years of Catch the King, Esri, who develops a lot of the geographic information systems, databases, they're the world leader in terms of software that helps you map things. And in many cases, the interactive maps that we build from the data collected from the Sea Level Rise app go directly into Esri's applications. Don Wright, their chief science officer there at Esri, has ghostwritten a blog about us a couple of times over the year, first in 2017, but also we were featured on Science Friday in 2019 with Ira Flato, along with these videos don't have any sounds, just because I plan to talk over them. But for the most part, over the last couple of years, we've had some really great opportunities on a nationwide scale to really tell people about the cool work that you guys have been involved with, including several spots on the Weather Channel back in 2020. And as Gabi mentioned earlier, it's like we kind of got a very last minute phone call, like less than 24 hours before we ended up going on TV, and wasn't sure if it was actually going to happen until it did. But they've started to regularly feature, usually about the same week that we do Catch the King every year, usually sometime around the 3rd or 4th week of October is their King Tide Week across the U.S. Eastern Seaboard. The king tide doesn't always happen here the same time that it does the highest astronomical tide in some of the lagoons of Florida or areas of South Carolina and North Carolina, but in many cases, they kind of coincide usually within the same week or so. And so as a result, that's kind of provided us an opportunity on a nationwide platform to be able to talk about some of the cool work that you guys have been involved in when you collect data with the app developed by Wetlands Watch called Sea Level Rise. Now, we've collected data since 2017, and the utility behind the community science work that you're doing really helps us visualize tomorrow's flooding today. You'll be able to capture what's happening during the highest astronomical tide, which is kind of really the core ask from Wetlands Watch, along with the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, where I work, is for you to help collect these data that help us validate the accuracy of flood models. That's my interest in the data, but we also make the data publicly available so that other scientists who are working on these types of data sets can also learn a little bit more about specifically what's happening in the Hampton Roads region. And part of the value behind this is it also draws attention to what's happening here in Hampton Roads as we look at some of these different areas that have flooded year after year after year in different places. But we also realize that, makes sense for us to be able to collect data the 2 to 3 times a year that some of these spaces flood. But then we build composite maps of all the different places that you've collected data over each of these years. And you can quickly kind of zoom in and see, okay, which place has been monitored in the past and which areas have been shown to flood. And so probably for the last 4 years or so, we started developing just kind of a fall tidal flooding calendar. There's a group in North Carolina that develops kind of an annual calendar that covers all the months of the year. Although in Virginia, in many cases, we find that the flooding in April and May and the spring tides are not usually as significant as those in the fall, primarily due to the fact that you have compounding influences of detritus and leaf litter clogging up storm drainage in the fall. And that usually kind of makes things a little bit worse in the sense that a lot of the conduits that are designed to make water exit the roadways and a lot of the other public spaces that we kind of tend to collect data during Catch the King will usually become pronounced due to the fact that there's not quite as many drainage outlets. And also in some cases, the water table will be higher due to the several days leading up to the king tide, making the water table higher and higher incrementally. So with these data, we're really excited to gather nearly I guess a little over 15,000 high water marks. And I won't go into too much detail on this data set since Gabi did a great job covering all of our major contributors from the different regions, but we really applaud the efforts that you've been involved in. And also want to thank our year-round mappers. Occasionally I have people email me data sets, or I'm able to go to the Sea Rising Solutions websites where some of you have made your data events accessible, where I can download the data directly from the portal. 18 of you throughout the course of this year, including Joe Bouchard and his team and others, have been kind enough to share data with me, Brian Barmore as well. And we collected nearly 2,000 GPS high water marks throughout some of these other events where there was flooding that happened outside of Catch the King this year in 2022. Now, of course, the way that we usually try to communicate this information is that, we've had a large number of media sponsors over the years, along with those that just continue to tell our story based on individuals that are collecting data. We really thank them for providing us this type of spotlight from our local media markets, but also from a statewide and nationwide perspective. And so it's really just very fortunate that we've been able to have folks that can help kind of shed light on these issues. Part of the passion behind Dave Mayfield's reporting on environmental issues in Virginia for so many years is really what kind of sparked a lot of interest in this early on in 2017 and 2018. But the continued spotlight, the WHRO Public Media, Virginian Pilot, and Daily Press, along with the Virginia Commonwealth Center for Recurrent Flooding Resiliency, have kind of allowed me to be able to dedicate quite a bit of my time to this issue. Is oftentimes scientists, we have to kind of focus on the issues that are a particular public interest, especially since I'm a state employee. And so this kind of keeps these issues in the public eye where I can continue to work on these cool projects in a lot of variety of different ways. But also media partners have been really helpful in kind of drawing attention to these issues, and a lot of the articles that are published from a variety of different sources, from weather.gov to others in the past years and even the current year, were kind enough to be able to kind of show where people can volunteer for Catch the King and provided links where people can access the sign up for this year's event. And so we really appreciate all of the work that you guys have put into this as volunteers to help us collect relevant data pertaining to flooding in the Commonwealth. And as a result, yes, the first year that we did this event, we collected 59,718 certified high water marks that Guinness World Records was able to recognize that we were the world's largest environmental survey on the planet in 2017, and we still currently hold the record today. In terms of how your data are used from a modeling perspective, we have an operational forecast model driven by hydrodynamic forecasts at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, leveraging a model called SCISM developed by Dr. Joseph Zhang and the Center for Coastal Resources Management. This model runs twice daily at noon and midnight, mostly to predict flooding up to 36 hours in advance. It does this to produce things on a spatial scale in terms of X and Y dimensions at 3 foot or 1 meter spatial scale, approximately, and it has a temporal resolution of 1 hourly data. So every individual pixel at 1 meter resolution throughout the state is updated for every 36 hours. So in this case, for a 36-hour forecast, it's a bunch of 12-hour overlapping forecasts. It updates at noon and midnight. And so over time, we're able to kind of get a picture of what the flooding will look like up to 36 hours in advance. And this model continues to update as we get new data from the National Weather Service in Wakefield, Virginia, for Tidewater, Virginia. Now, each 36-hour simulation takes about an hour and a half, and the interest behind this in terms of actual computing time is important, mostly because as we continue to increase the resolution of these models, they get more computationally expensive, but also it means it requires a lot more effort to validate the accuracy of the forecasts that are shown in these spaces. As you increase the resolution, you're now relying more heavily on additional data from water level sensors and from citizen science volunteers using their mobile devices like you did using the Sea Level Rise app. As this image collected by Skip Stiles back in 2018 shows in the Larchmont neighborhood of Norfolk, essentially these GPS breadcrumbs that you're dropping within the Sea Level Rise app is of monumental importance because our model that's shown on the right was able to quite accurately predict the inundation that was happening at this time during a kind of a combined rain and king tide event in September, where we had volunteers that were actually being trained around this time on the weekend in September, right before Hurricane Florence kind of grazed us. And later in 2018, just probably about a week or so later. And so based on the data that we were able to collect from both of those events, it's particularly useful to show where the flooding is happening. And the shape of the flooding almost perfectly matches all of the public spaces that volunteers were able to collect data and help us provide these digital breadcrumbs that validate the data geospatially within these maps. Now, the Sea Level Rise app has been available since 2014 when version 1 came out, and there are just a handful of about a dozen users from 2014 to 2016 that were using it. It wasn't until the inaugural year of Catch the King that a new update for the app came out to version 2.0 and allowed us to engage with a large number of volunteers collecting data. Officially within the Catch the King regions that we set up for the events, we had 718 volunteers that collected data, but then we had dozens more volunteers that ended up creating their own events that over probably 6 months or so, I continually had people constantly emailing me data sets and sheets that they were able to download with my copy and paste directions and emails to tell them exactly how to download the data from Sea Rising Solutions. Through their website. And overall, we were able to collect over 60,000 GPS high water marks. But by that point, we had already submitted our application to Guinness World Records. And so as a result, that's why the numbers are slightly different there. But each year, we've noticed that it's like the data that you've collected through the Sea Level Rise app has collected cumulatively over 200,000 GPS high water marks. And these are just event-related high water marks, not counting those that are collected within the trouble spots section of the app. And so we're really excited this year, as Skip kind of pointed out earlier, to kind of get out of that COVID slump of not being able to train new volunteers to use the app. And Karen Duhring and myself are very privileged to be able to present at the Virginia Master Naturalists annual event in Virginia Beach back in September, where a couple of you on this video call were able to attend with us. And we're really excited about the data that you were able to collect this year. We essentially take those GPS pins and turn them into contours and then compare those contours with the digital elevation models that are kind of the underlying assumptions behind the gravitational flow elements of our model from hydrologic standpoint perspectives. We just compare each of those points linearly using a mean horizontal distance deviation that tells us, given n the total number of samples, what that difference is an average value for each of these spots. And so I kind of divide them into sites and then translate those information accordingly. The challenge, of course, of the statistical analysis is that, well, we have models that, as I mentioned, are updating hourly for 36-hour forecasts, which means we've got 36 frames of data every time that our model is outputting forecasts. And so as these data are shared, our model has increased in resolution since these examples in 2016. These are some of the first data points that I was able to collect with the Sea Level Rise app back in 2016. And it's really exciting to kind of see how these data have been able to help us validate our model in a variety of different ways. So by the first time we started collecting data with the app in different places, we were able to kind of link in the forecasts from our water level sensors through the Tide Watch program at VIMS. And so with those, we have tidal forecasts that are driven using data from water levels in real time and helping inform up to 36 hours in advance what those elevations will be from a time series perspective. But the Tide Watch map also provides you this information in spatial scale as well. And we plot these usually every year with a map that will kind of give you an idea of what the flooding looks like in your area. And you'll see your data pop up in the map in usually near real time. So with this information, we've kind of compared this 8 to 9 a.m., for example, versus 9 to 10 a.m. as the last major publication that we published in the Journal of Marine Science and Engineering back in 2019, showing a lot of the data that we've collected in some of these separate individual events and how they vary hour by hour. And so these deviations differ based on every frame of our forecast. And so even though there may only be flooding during these king tides for 1 to 2, maybe 3 hours, depending on which direction the wind might be slightly blowing at 15 miles per hour north-northeast, this information will cause, ponding of water in different places. And as a result, we're able to capture that with our model in a variety of different places, like these examples in Norfolk near the Haven Creek boat ramp, or some of these spots further up the Lafayette River in Norfolk, and these spaces in Virginia Beach accordingly near Little Creek. And so as these spaces flood, we're able to kind of go through and compare hour by hour to figure out not only did it just flood in these areas, but is the duration of the flooding actually mapping specifically the time that there was water ponding on those roadways? Because a lot of the parameters of our model, like friction as a restorative force, can sometimes cause the water to pool up on the flooded areas, kind of like molasses, and never actually return back to the roadway. And so we need to modify the coefficients of static friction in these spaces to represent the relative vegetation there accordingly. And this is particularly important in intertidal wetlands, but also in paved surfaces and other areas where the water doesn't normally belong. So given this information in conclusion, we learned an awful lot as it pertains to hydrologic correction. In many cases, aerial survey data from LIDAR, or light detection and ranging using lasers from aircraft, measuring that backscatter, provides us a loose interpretation of what these surfaces that our model should look like, will kind of return back. And the challenge, of course, is that usually bridges over creeks that are usually only temporarily tidal, usually during these highest astronomical tides of the year, typically non-tidal creeks can become tidal. And so as a result, there's other spaces where there's just issues with a very tiny culvert that is not fully digitized within the map, like this example in Norfolk in the Larchmont neighborhood, where you can even see from the satellite imagery that there was dark in those areas. But you can compare where some of these individual points that were collected by volunteers in this map, there were maybe 300 feet from the nearest flooded pixel. We're able to calculate those in GIS. And so our geographic information systems will tell you where those deviations exist, and we know that there's something that needs to be corrected accordingly. So your data help us in a variety of different ways to be able to interpret where there are spaces where maybe roadways are blocking, where flooding should be occurring, like this three-dimensional model I built for my dissertation in Hurricane Sandy in New York City. It's not just dense urban environments like Norfolk and Virginia Beach. This is an issue that plagues any area that there's regular flooding. And you have to take a lot of special care to be able to rectify these things. And sometimes without your data, it's really particularly difficult to be able to ascertain whether the flooding is actually happening in these spaces. So given the information that we've been able to collect, your GPS high water marks have helped us highlight new areas that we need to focus on, especially in the Virginia Middle Peninsula and Northern Neck this year. With many of the volunteers that helped us collect data up there, we're particularly eager at kind of exploring the influences of flooding in some of those spaces. And so as a result, middle of this year, we started collecting data using drone surveys. You'll hear a little bit more from Tom Allen a little bit later on, talking about the Blue Line projects at Old Dominion University, but also collaborated independently with drone surveys collected by MITRE Tech as well in Virginia Beach and parts of Norfolk. We've also involved real-time kinematic surveys to help us benchmark where new water level sensors belong for areas that need more regular monitoring. And ultimately, environmental surveys helped us identify where there's some challenges involved with tidal flooding, and the work that is done by Margie Mulholland and her PhD student, Alfonso Macias Tapia, have done some really great work in terms of calculating total maximum daily loads that you'll hear from them in a second about that. On the vertical scale, our hydrodynamic model was accurate within approximately 1.19 inches or a couple centimeters. And on the horizontal scale, this ended up being approximately 3.5 meters in terms of the average of each of those 15,000 individual values that were collected during the 2022 flood forecast relative to the individual GPS data points you collected. We were pretty pleased with that since our model's resolution scales to 1 meter scale. That's usually a handful of pixels or less for each of those values. Now, given Catch the King's ability to help us kind of identify where the hydrologic correction needs to be done, we continue to survey. In most of these cases, the drone surveys are focusing on ditches and narrow creeks, where in these cases, you've got relatively steep drop-offs of water where you've got data that's being collected in these spaces that are typically non-tidal ditches, but folks in rural areas, particularly Matthews County and areas further north of there in the Middle Peninsula, and parts of the northern neck, you'll notice that a lot of these ditches are now being used as kind of conveyance for tidal flooding very deep into those counties, not just areas that are directly contiguous with the tidal floodwaters of Chesapeake Bay. And so those have been particularly important for us to continue to monitor as we're seeing sea level rise happen in real time during these events. But also engaging you as volunteers, the public, to be able to help us collect data. You're able to collect space data in a lot of these areas, and this image kind of illustrates where flooding, of course, floods beyond fences. And so sometimes your data, of course, are not naturally going to map the full extent of the flooding that may be observed by our models that shows flooding go all the way up to the back doorstep of some of these buildings. And that's perfectly okay, because we're happy with, sometimes the statistical error exists just to ensure that, there is flooding happening in these spaces at all. It doesn't have to perfectly match the footprint. We mostly want to be able to identify in other spaces next to where those are. They'll tell us what the shape of those footprints of flooding are. And we know based on that contour, the flooding depth must be somewhere around the same proximal depth in areas that you couldn't perfectly match where there are impediments to your movement. So thank you for your help in collecting data on the 29th of October this year during Catch the King. And a big thank you to all of the many volunteers and the coordination team that really made this year's Catch the King possible.
Thank you so much, Derek. Really, really informative. And I absolutely loved that last graphic that you had that kind of had the shutter over the two sets of data. I think that's a really fantastic way to show how that data can be used. So thank you for that. I did receive a message from Tom, who will be joining us. There he is. He just popped in. Before we pass it over to him, I'm going to send just a couple links in the chat. These are just a couple. I have the Facebook group linked, as well as the High Water Watch newsletter through Wetlands Watch, which is a great way to receive very nice little narrative updates from Skip Stiles about flooding in the Tidewater area, which is a great way in case you want to go out and map. It's a good way to stay informed about flooding happening. And then as well as the VIMS CCRM e-newsletter as well. These are all linked in the agenda, but I'm just going to throw them in the chat. And with that, let me give Tom presenter authority and take it away, Tom.
Hey, maybe you see a YouTube picture now, I think. I think what I'd like to do is talk to you about the Blue Line project, which has been awesome to kind of piggyback and complement on the Catch the King. The Blue Line project is mimics some other similarly named projects around the country and even in the UK, where we seek to envision the future of supply. So the blue line in this case represents a line physically on the ground where the eventual high tide mark might be. And so I've trained a couple of different years Old Dominion students to actually take either coastal geography or marine geography or a GIS class, Geographic Information Systems, and sort of get this volunteer group to actually mark this on the ground quite scientifically using light detection and ranging elevation mapping from either airplanes, drones, or satellites, and GIS and surveying and GPS techniques to actually map this. So I'll kick this off by playing a little retrospective video from this group. We also had complimentary support from lecturer Riley Harris at ODU doing the drone videography and some of the musical attachments. After that, I'm going to show you the interactive map, which you can get to by tinyurl.com/bluelineodu. So it's been really neat to piggyback this onto the Catch the King broader effort. So with that, I'm going to go play the video. You might recognize this as Colonial Place in Knitting Mill Creek. Word to the wise, don't host an open house during king tides. And for the second half of this video, I'm highlighting another class of mine, geospatial data analysis, which has been working with mechanical, aerospace, and oceanography students to deploy drones. This is our autonomous surface vessel, the high drone, and we're using this to map the bathymetry of the creek, which is going to be used to help improve or invalidate some of the models, such as Derek was illustrating. Here are some of our drone pilots from ODU. That's George McLeod is one of them. He's launching a DJI Mavic. And we use that to actually map the footprint on the ground of the king tide, very similar to several of you volunteers. We were able to get to some other areas that are interesting. A couple of them are inland, where the tidal water is backflowing up the stormwater infrastructure in flooding areas, sort of discontinuous from the actual creek itself. And a lot of acknowledgements here to both you guys in Catch the King and the NOAA National Genetic Survey, ODU ICAR, City of Norfolk, who's also facilitated this, and several of my faculty colleagues. With that, I will stop that, and I'm going to pop over to the tinyurl.com, and in there you'll find a link and some of our prior propaganda efforts. I guess we have actually the Blue Line Project logo was designed by an ODU art student. Click on the story map, you'll actually be able to get to another story map that has interactive maps. So if you're familiar with Colonial Place, this is the neighborhoods, Knitting Mill Creek, North Colley Avenue, and we've got delineated here the shorelines of today, 2040, 2050, 2080, and 2100 using NOAA sea level rise projections. Actually, these are some of the same projections that are adopted by the local municipalities for sea level rise and resilience planning. And very interestingly, this part of Colonial Place that we chose this year to focus upon has some fill, dredging and dredge spoiled and filled areas, and actually some relict tidal creeks that you could see in that video that showed the area where the water wants to go, where it once was. And in this case, there's interesting contours in the future shorelines that show they make a V pointing upstream, and as do some of the streets today. We actually were camped out at this area just off Mayflower, I think it's Gosnold Avenue, and water was flowing under the neighborhood, under parcels, and up the stormwater infrastructure and flooding in this creek area. And both us and the drone imagery were able to capture that. So we have other interesting visualizations of this, barring sort of coastal mega engineering projects, which may or may not come to pass, that could be interesting to look at in the future. I've also brought in this, I see Riley Harris is in the call now. Other people that are interested in ODU include folks in the art department and education, who maybe next year we add on an artistic component to this. Brendan Baylor, a textiles specialist, another sculptor, and us have had kind of interesting conversations, could lead to some future possibilities. I don't know if I have Robin or Drew on the line, but they were some students that were on there. If you have anything to add, please pop on in, or questions from the audience.
Tom, do you also mind giving just a quick intro to yourself? I think a few of us can piece together who you are, but I think it'd be good.
Just so you can relate to me, a couple levels. I'm a native of Portsmouth and even back to a graduate of Norcom High School, and did my undergrad at Old Dominion University in geography and geology. But now I'm a professor at Old Dominion in geography, and I specialize in GIS and remote sensing applied to coastal environments, kind of a combination of both ecological and coastal hazards, so flooding, erosion, sea level rise, and like. And I teach courses in coastal marine geography and GIS now. Recognize several names in the participant list, but haven't met a lot of you either. And also at ODU, we have the Institute for Coastal Adaptation and Resilience, ICAR, and I'm one of the faculty involved with that. But I also would point out that we've got resilience themes across the university. I see Yusuf is on here from Public Administration and Strom College of Business, Ocean and Earth Sciences, Civil and Environmental Engineering, Geography and Arts and Letters. So those are kind of some of the sort of prime time departments. And of course you have Margie, Mulholland, and Ocean and Earth Science with our awesome Measure the Muck.
Thank you so much, Tom. We have a Q&A session scheduled for a little later, so I think I will pass it along to Dr. Mulholland if she's ready.
I am indeed.
Oh, and also just to highlight Blue Line a little bit more, this partnership is really awesome because it's a great representation, as well as Dr. Mulholland's presentation up next, of how we can expand flood mapping efforts. And it's not just a citizen science effort, it's also a public awareness effort. And so seeing these folks out there on the street doing these really awesome projects is just a really great showcase of the partnership and how far it can go as far as preparedness and resilience and all of that great stuff. So thank you so much, Tom, for your continued partnership and support. And I'm excited to see where we can take it.
Great. So you ready for me to go? All right.
Sorry.
Well, as I said before, I'm Margie Mulholland, and I'm a professor in Ocean and Earth Sciences at ODU. And we decided to take advantage of Capture the King and do a Measure the Muck event. My initials are MM, and we had to find a catchy name, so that was it. And like I said in my introduction, is when we were beta testing the first versions of the phone app, we would go out as a family, and I just kept thinking, ew, this stuff is gross in this water. And I knew I was at the time sitting on the Chesapeake Bay Program Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee, and so I knew the models weren't counting anything that was going into the water as a result of tidal flooding. And so that was sort of the inspiration for this. And I have to thank Alfonso Macias Tapia, the PhD student who did most of the work. I just get to talk about it. And the Army of Volunteers that really collected all the samples, and Derek for calculating all those flood volumes. Sorry, your last name got lost in the black there. And I also need to thank the Hampton Roads Sanitation District, because they actually paid for us to be able to do this. So that was really necessary to be able to analyze all the samples we created. But some of this I've said already, but that we're trying to restore the Chesapeake Bay, and a lot of the impairments that we're trying to restore the bay with have been linked to human activities, things like nutrient inputs from fertilizers, urban and suburban and agricultural runoff, groundwater, wastewater treatment plants. And some of these impairments, and one that I work on, is harmful algal blooms. And this is a picture in the James River during a harmful bloom event. And this is a picture of a bioluminescent harmful algae that made the front pages of the newspaper when it was blooming. And so these can be quite alarming and eye-catching events when we have them. And I just wanted to give you a 101, one-slide primer on the restoration. But the original restoration agreement that was made in 1985 was non-binding. And since the restoration showed insufficient progress, by 2010, the EPA stepped in because there was a consent decree in Virginia and Washington, D.C. And then that was followed by the Obama executive order. And when the EPA stepped in, they set total maximum daily loads for the bay-wide, segment by segment. So that is essentially the nutrient diet that you've heard that the bay is on. And these are segment specific. So there are 92 smaller TMDLs. And I'll tell you why this is relevant in just a little bit, but all the regulated sources include things from the end of a pipe or point sources, and then they also include non-point source runoff, but not anything to do with coastal flooding. If you want more information about the TMDL, I put links in my presentation, so you're welcome to go look up more. But essentially, as I said, when we were out looking around, what loads are we missing in these TMDLs? What loads are we not accounting for? And how are we cheating on that nutrient diet that we're putting the bay on? We're counting runoff, like I said, but we're not counting flooding on this scale. When you have whole roadways underwater and whole neighborhoods underwater, cars underwater. So we're just not counting it. And in this region, we're not limited to runoff during storms. We have flooding when the skies are blue, as everybody knows who has been part of this sampling. And so it's a real problem and it's not being counted. And this is a figure from Tal Ezer's, a paper he did, and it just shows the hours per year above mean high water. And it's in feet, which is weird, but it's essentially the hours per year above mean high water. And you can see from this that it's increasing, and it's not really a linear increase. It's increasing rapidly that amount of time we're in a flooded state. Okay, so it floods, it's hard to get around, so it's really inconvenient because cars go underwater, intersections get clogged, and you've all seen this during the measure, the Catch the King mapping. But on land, we're starting to adapt. Signs are going up in different places to show you where not to park, not to drive fast through the water if you're going to drive through it at all, and tell you how high that water got. And so we're adapting on land. And most of the efforts to date to adapt or mitigate effects of sea level rise have focused on the landward side of the equation and protecting infrastructure, things like notifying, not repopulating buildings that get routinely flooded or raising houses and things like that. So most of what we're doing is on land. But I wanted to start thinking about what was happening on the water side of the equation. We see these little signs that Scotty Harper put all over our drains and in the city of Norfolk showing that this water drains to the Chesapeake Bay. And this is a picture of floodwater. And all that is in that water is draining back into the bay when floodwaters recede. Alfonso made this really nice cartoon of the water sitting nicely in its well-behaved estuary. And here we have flooding, and it comes up on land, and pretty much anything on the landscape winds up going into the estuary when the floodwaters retreat. And this includes construction materials from building, garbage, car oil, and this is one of my favorite neighborhoods to go sample when it floods. It's a student housing area on 52nd Street in Norfolk, and there's always tipped over garbage cans in the water. And it's wrong on so many levels because usually the recycling bin is full of trash. And actually, a funny anecdote about this site is one time I was there sampling and someone came out, saw that their trash can was underwater and they had a bag of trash they were going to deposit. And they looked at it, they started walking back to the house, they turned back around and just flung the bag of trash right in the water. And so this stuff happens. Sadly, and the load, we know that it's the load is unquantified. And in these pictures here, you can see the oil sheen on this water. So we know it's not just nutrients, it's other contaminants as well, but we really don't have the capacity to measure all of those. But anyway, here's some pictures of things going in. There's all sorts of litter. We sort of have little contests about who can find the grossest thing in the water when we're mapping. Like I said, trash cans and just bags of trash. Lots of animal waste. We got our dog to pose for this picture, so we cheated a little. And here's the, the water just bubbling up the sewer drains. And in this picture, you can't really see it very well, but there's actually toilet paper coming back up out of the drain. One of my students took that picture. But why do we care? Well, all these unaccounted for nutrient loads are leading to impairments, and these include harmful algal blooms that can kill fish and just cause other ecological damage in the bay. And this is a picture. This is the Hampton Roads Bridge, and here's the yacht club here. And we monitor this site a lot, but this is a picture taken from an overflight of this discolored water that's all algae. And this is the bioluminescent algae that made the stir and now occurs during the summer quite often. And my question is essentially, how can we hope to restore the bay if we don't count these nutrients? And in fact, just last week, another bay report card came out, and sure enough, it's not improving again. We still got a D+ in terms of water quality. So what we wanted to do by measuring the muck, it's actually pretty difficult. It sounds easy, just measure nutrient concentrations, right? In it, well, you have to have hundreds of samples to be statistically relevant, and they have to be collected synaptically near high tide. So you have to have lots of samples all at once. So you can't just have a couple people going out and doing that. You need really a small army, and they need to be deployed at the same time. And so if you're going to harness that army, you need to pick a time when you know there'll be flooding in advance. So the Catch the King events, that was perfect because we knew there was flooding, we knew there was public interest being raised, and then and we also knew that the high schoolers needed volunteer hours. So we took advantage of high school students as well. We also needed to be able to calculate the floodwater volumes based on the extent of flooding, and that's where Derek came in because he was doing just that and having those models be improved through all the Catch the King data. And we needed to know what was already in the estuary before the flooding happened, because you don't want to count that, right? You have to subtract that back out from your load. So there are a lot of things we needed to know. So we tapped into the Capture the King tide. So thank you, Wetlands Watch. We thought of that catchy name, Measure the Muck, and we engaged students. And in particular, we targeted the AP Environmental Sciences classes from Morey and Granby High School. And so they came out. And we also had ODU graduate students and personnel involved. And what we did is we had additional trainings. They were trained to map, but we also trained them to collect water samples while they mapped. And then we provided them with kits for sampling. And the last thing we had to do is find an accessible watershed to work in where we could get a lot of samples. We wanted it to have its own TMDL. And so we targeted the Lafayette River because it is a small tributary that has its own TMDL and it's near to ODU's campus. And this is a picture just of the Lafayette River watershed. And there's a lot of Catch the King volunteers in this area too. And we know there's lots of tidal flooding. And this is just a figure showing, I forget how much, I think it's a foot of flooding or a meter of flooding in the Lafayette River. And that's all marked in red as what should be underwater. And so we use the Lafayette River. On the day of the Capture the King event, I got a teaching lab that I reserved. And we had these cooler kits that we filled with sample bottles, gloves, everything they would need, a clipboard to do manual writing of samples. But essentially, we armed them with these sample kits, gave them a map, and sent them out to a particular area to collect the samples. And then when all the samples came back, we liked them back within an hour-ish of high tide, we processed all these samples in the lab, and some of the students helped. So really, it was just an army of people in there. And this is Alfonso here. packing the coolers, just so you know. Yeah, and then we sent the groups out. They did the maps of the floodwaters here. They sampled, and usually they were teams of 4. So one person could be recording manually, another could be mapping, another sampling, and another actually using the phone app to log in the sample and put the sample number in the phone app at the site where they sampled, and then they would take a picture and make a note in the phone app. So the phone app was great actually for sampling. That said, we still did the manual log because sure enough, when we compared the two, you know, people would forget to do one or the other all routinely, but we had redundant records. And then once we started having results, we could essentially map these onto the study site with the floodwater volume superimposed. And we did this to sort of look for hotspots for where the nutrient loads are bigger. And here, these bigger green circles are higher concentrations of nitrogen. And in this case, it's just ammonium, so it's a form of nitrogen. Don't worry about that. But that's just the sort of products we can do. And then from this, we were able to really simply calculate a nutrient load for the system. And so what we did is we calculate the nutrient load, and all we needed to know was that volume of floodwater, the median floodwater nutrient concentration, and then we had to subtract the concentration that was already in the river from that and multiply, you know, the difference by the floodwater volume. And so we did this. This is just a sample calculation for 2017. We accounted for error and all that in these. But in 2017, we calculated that there was 2,784 pounds of nitrogen from nitrate alone delivered to the estuary. And now that number doesn't mean a lot right now, but I'm just going to say in the next slide, I'm going to show you what that means. But the floodwater volume in each year, it actually varied from year to year. And of course, during the pandemic years, we had fewer volunteers, but we still were able to collect, you know, almost 200 samples per year. So we felt very fortunate about that. And the floodwater volume, it varied a little bit per year, as did the height of the mean seawater. Okay, but remember that about 2,800 pounds of nitrogen, and don't get lost with all these numbers here. I know it's crazy, but essentially this is the TMDL format. And this is the Lafayette River that I've highlighted here. So only look at this line. And the total nitrogen allowed per year to be delivered for the Lafayette River by this TMDL is 1,941 pounds. So what we found is that for nitrate alone, during that single year, about 1.5 times of the annual load of nitrogen was delivered during the single blue tide flooding event. And so that's a lot. It's not being counted toward the TMDL. And this is the TMDL for runoff, mind you. So just the overland flow. It's bigger for when you count the total load with everything at the end of the pipe. But essentially, we were really conservative in our calculations, and we didn't consider organic components or particulate, you know, from the sediment that came in. And this was a calculation for a single event. So we knew that there's also some variability in the load, very likely due to seasonality. You might have pollen on the street versus leaf litter, et cetera. The landscape prehistory, if it's just rained for 5 days in a row before it flooded, you can think that the load might be less than if it had been dry for the previous 5 days. And then there are lots of different land uses, and you can imagine from an impervious surface versus a lawn, you know, the load might be different. And so what we also did was we sampled at certain sentinel sites almost every time it flooded. You know, we tried to pick different land uses to do that. And I'm going to show you here just sort of the penultimate results from a lot of that. And I know it's busy, it's a busy figure, but essentially I'm going to walk you through it to tell you what we found. But essentially, we found this is each of the different flooding events where we sampled at different sites and at different floodwater volumes or mean high water that it got to that day. And this is just the nutrient load. It's the difference in the nitrogen from what was in the estuary and what was in the floodwaters. And essentially what you can see is there is a pattern, even though there's a huge amount of variability, there's a pattern that the more flooding you get, the more nitrogen gets loaded. And this is nitrogen, this is phosphorus. And it's sort of true for both of them. The more The more flooding there is in general, the more nitrogen there is, but it is highly variable. Alfonso also just went and backcast the nutrient load based on water levels from Sewell's Point. And what he found is essentially as the flooding has increased over time, so has the nutrient load. So we're increasing nutrient loads by quite a lot as a result of tidal flooding. And these are new, these are in a paper he hasn't even submitted yet, or they'll be in other part of his thesis. The last thing I want to talk about that's also alarming is the Virginia Department of Health and HRC both ran 20 samples for us each year for fecal material loading. And these are just box and whisker plots showing the mean fecal indicator number and the maximum and minimums and the range with the standard deviation. So, and then this red line at the bottom, that is what is allowable for recreational water use in Virginia. Okay, so they closed beaches above this red line. And all of the, most all of the samples, very few were even close to that line. And many of them were off scale. And the highest number we could get with the assay was 24,000. That's just off scale. The Virginia swimming standard is 104, and it's a really weird unit. It's called a most probable number, but that's, you know, what the assay measures. So, but the upshot is there's a lot of fecal contamination in that water. And I've seen kids out there when we've been sampling, treating a flood day, because we have had them in Norfolk where the buses can't make it to the bus stop and they delay school, but the kids are out playing in the water, you know, running around, jumping, getting their boogie boards out, and it's gross. And here's a picture taken a long time ago by one of my former students of someone swimming down by the Hague in that water. And so given our fecal matter results, I would argue, no, don't do that. And so what I want to leave you with is just this climate change and flooding. It's going to impact our restoration efforts. You know, not only is it impacting things on land, but it's impacting our restoration efforts. And so we need to put some resources into better custody of our landscape, or in taking care of it, and so that we can reduce some of the water quality impairments. You know, maybe there needs to be flood alerts so people clean up their yards, you know, sort of like the River Stars program of the Elizabeth River Project. You know, maybe we need a Flood Star program so people clean up their landscapes. But with that, I just want to thank, again, all the volunteers and all the Catch the King support that we had, all the volunteers for Measure the Muck, the high school students, the teachers, and also the Hampton Roads Sanitation District for, you know, without whose funding we wouldn't have been able to do this at all. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Margie. I said wow once in the chat, but I wanted to say it, I think maybe 8 more times, because I certainly was not aware of all of the data you just shared. So thank you for collecting that. It looked like an awesome time for the students too. That's the kind of lab work I wish I could go back to in college. So thank you so much for sharing that. And again, echoing what we said about Blue Line, it's really great to have these kind of extension programs to kind of round out all the information we can collect with this kind of citizen science event. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So our next kind of 15-minute block, and we'll go as little or as long as we need to, is just, I'm going to open the floor for Q&A. I'm going to throw the photo slideshow back up on the screen in case anybody didn't get a chance to see some of the photos that came out of Catch the King. But I will open the floor to everybody. If you have questions, comments, general feedback, if you have a story to tell, now would be a fabulous opportunity. And then we'll open the floor up to a couple of our tide captains to talk about year-round mapping. So if you're interested in doing some mapping throughout the year with high water and rainfall flooding, feel free to stay on the call and check that out a little later.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Daniel. I'm a volunteer mapper in Norfolk, retired Navy, 25 years, been stationed here for a long time. I'm also a clean water captain for Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And I just want to say thank you to all of the organizations that were involved in this. I absolutely love seeing all these pictures and all the explanations of how these samples are being used and analyzed. It's really great to see. I plan on being a full-time captain. If signed up for that, and I have the intention on contacting the area bases for like public affairs offices and stuff to see if we can get some environmental coordinators from the bases involved in this to raise awareness and maybe get volunteers for future events. I mapped the Little Creek base around the marina this year, and if I can get more volunteers on the bases, maybe we can map around them, because I know it impacts future readiness of our military. So hopefully we can get some data on those bases for you guys.
Hey, Brian, can I just say a quick response to that is, that's one of our problems with measuring the muck sometimes is we can only go to publicly accessible property. So, being able to get on the base, where again, land use is so different would be absolutely fabulous to be able to get some numbers. What we eventually want to do with all of this is sample more land use types and then scale up bay-wide, via models, and, perhaps the whole East Coast of the U.S., be able to scale up based on land use type. And I know Tom has helped Alfonso a lot as well with, trying to better understand the land use and its impact on what the load is going to be to the water. So that'd be great if you could get samplers on the base.
Yeah, I'll do what I can.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Echoing what Margie just said, the publicly accessible spots are really all we can promote, but the more teams that we have in those privately owned areas is going to do immense wonders for data modeling and data collection. So thank you, and we'll definitely be in touch. And you said you did fill out the interest mapping form?
Yes, I did.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Frank Polster out of James City County, if I can. One of the remarkable things about this presentation is the diversity in the different communities. And of course, the focus in the urban areas in the Norfolk, Virginia Beach area. But some of those same issues, I think, are relevant to the non-tidal areas. And I'm from James City County, as well as the Middle Peninsula. And so trying to make that connection in terms of the last presentation and what that means for increased precipitation and flooding and non-tidal flooding is something I got to scratch my head about, especially when at least two of our watersheds have TMDL for fecal pieces on that. So I need to think about that piece. But the other thing that I liked about that last presentation is the assumptions in the compilation of the data was very clear. And one of the things that Derek Loftis and I have gone through over, and I've made this comment to Skip over the last, since 2017, is that the LIDAR data that we don't have the LIDAR data in James City County. And so the predictions that he's had over a number of years, frankly, don't match up to some of the restoration projects that we've had for it. And so my point is that first off, as I found out today, that there is going to be LIDAR data at 1 meter intervals available for James City County, which is the basis for Derek's assumptions of the impacts of sea level rise coordinated with the different predictions. And so my point is that we need to take advantage of that data to look at the mitigation strategies that communities had put in. And the reason this came out in 2017 with Derek was the Jamestown Beach did a stream restoration with groins. And so his prediction showed where the sea level rise is going to be, which didn't bear out by the data. And since then, we've done several projects in the Chickahominy Riverfront, the Grace Run, and the most impressive shoreline restoration project was on the Carter Grove for almost 1.3 miles that I sent Skip a video of to see that. And so as we go forward, it's not only the problems that we see from the data, but it's also the successes of these restoration projects that we have, and so that we have the accurate data. Now, I don't know about the LiDAR data for the rest of those communities, but I know that when I try to convince people that there's a problem here in James City County, it's hard for me to argue that because I'm not certain that the underlying assumptions of what we have is correct. And I only leave that just because I think we're going to get better, but we need to continue to challenge the underlying assumptions that these predictions are based on. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Derek or Margie, do you guys have any comments on that?
Sure, I can comment first, I guess, on the LiDAR uncertainties in the Jamestown Beach area. I know we've been using a LiDAR survey that was, conducted by the U.S. Geological Survey based on merged digital elevation models throughout this area. And it is retrieving data from a 2013 LiDAR survey, so it does not include the information from Jamestown Beach's recent restorations. And Frank and I have talked about this a couple of times because we've kind of hoped that there would be a new LiDAR survey. We've talked to VITA at the state level. In fact, there was supposed to be a LiDAR survey flown in 2020, and then the pandemic kind of delayed that. So I believe late 2021, and then I'm not sure if that LiDAR survey has already happened but hasn't been processed yet or where it stands so far. But there is supposed to be, as Frank said, the new LiDAR survey at 1 meter point spacing for that area that would be able to be something that we can then integrate into our model. But as it stands, he's correct. It's been that way for probably the last 5 years or so now since the first Catch the King. And we've integrated the previous LiDAR survey into our map, which is based on 2013 data, which is now about a decade old. So the hope is always to continue to update the model with new information, but until that's done, you're not going to have the correct flood elevations for those areas. And this is where the question from volunteers comes in pretty often. Is it really useful for me to map beaches because the sand, even from erosion from one year to the next, can vastly shape dune structures and back swales of beaches if you're mapping where water comes up behind the dunes in sound environments? We see this pretty frequently, and the answer is yes, it is useful for us because in many cases we'll get access to when these new LiDAR surveys come in, either whether they're hosted by the state at VITA or whether they're coming in from post-damage assessment surveys when major storm surges happen. Usually NOAA, along with the U.S. Geological Survey, will collect data, and we'll go in and assess, what is the dune profile shape? How has it changed since the previous survey? And when those new surveys come in, it allows us to reevaluate how the shape of, for example, we've had a lot of people collect data on Willoughby Spit in Norfolk, along with large portions of Virginia Beach. And we're seeing a lot of beaches now in the Middle Peninsula and Northern Neck that have been newly mapped by volunteers in this year's Catch the King. And so as we get new data for those communities, as Frank pointed out, I don't think it covers all of the communities in that area. I think it was James City County, parts of Fort Eustis, and parts of Newport News, it looks like, that were in this survey that was recent. I think it's either on the docket to be flown or has already been flown but not been post-processed yet. But once we have those LiDAR data, our plan is usually to integrate them into our Tidewatch map. So,
Derek, my GIS person says it's in post-processing, so we'll see it soon, and of course I'll send it along. But the follow-on to that is that we're all different in terms of tidal flooding, and with the increased set of precipitations, one of the issues that I'm trying to look at is the idea that we're going to see the receding of shorelines in tidal areas that start to encroach into the RPAs and go up the rivers area. So the mapping of that is important because we're going to lose tax dollars to that, and we need to look at ways that we can mitigate that flow of that river receding into areas so that it's protected. And so this data that we're talking about with your mapping and the other things that you're doing in VIMS become very important to us to make decisions about where we are for mitigation strategies over the next 20, 30 years. And so I applaud you and the folks over at VIMS for what you're doing to provide us the science of what we need to do. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we also appreciate the help from Wetlands Watch. I know their CRS management with Madison Teeter, along with the efforts of Mary Carson's staff, have really been very helpful over the years. I know James City County currently, I think, is the highest rated in the CRS program as a Class 5 community, and you guys have made use of literally every form of data possible to help identify where these riparian protection areas are. And I know it kind of undercuts the value of these data when you're sending volunteers out there to collect data, knowing it's not going to match the map based on our older LiDAR data.
And we need to have a higher level of the freeboard area in our flooded areas that are projected. And your data allows us to start to put ordinances that start to make those areas that we know are going to be flooded. And so the reliability of that data in your mapping is so important.
Definitely. Margie, did you have something to say as well? I apologize.
No, not really. But, in terms of looking at water quality impacts, I was just going to point out how woefully inadequate our monitoring is of anything. And when we implement these restorations and whatnot, we don't monitor to see whether they're working or for how long they're working. There's just not enough money in the world to even determine whether some of these things that are being implemented are helping. And so, just wanted to make that point as well, as we need more monitoring.
Yeah, and tagging on to that, part of that year-round mapping effort and kind of where we envision the app going to at least get that baseline flooding data. We hope to push it in kind of non-coastal communities as well to see if we can establish some teams who are boots on the ground ready when it rains. We can at least have some people who are out there willing to go out, get a little bit wet, and record that rainfall flooding so we can see where those trouble spots are and know where we need to monitor in the future. So that's going to be a huge push, at least on our side, and collaborating with everybody as far as data collection goes, to get more coverage in non-coastal areas as well, to see where that rainfall flooding is really impacting. So that is in our minds and an active goal. Absolutely.
Yeah, this is Skip Stiles. Let me just throw a slide up here to show you what we're facing. I'm going to knock Gabi out here. So there's been some work done recently on increased rainfall intensity. This is some work that was done basically by the Chesapeake Bay program. But what it's showing is what they found out after Matthew. We're getting more rain, that those rain bombs and that rain intensity that we're all experiencing is real. And so here's a sample of the work that was done at Sewell's Point at the Naval Station. And this is for a 50-year storm. And you get out here on a 24-hour end of it, and this Atlas 14 line here of 8 inches. That's the current rainfall estimate that we use in all of our stormwater work, all of our design. But what this is finding is that actually that bottom number, 8.5 inches, is what's actually happening. So we're designing our stormwater systems based on last century's rainfall. And so what we're going to try to do as we move this app inland and start dealing with rainfall flooding is to begin to collect data on that missing piece. And also to be able to bring into it some of the compound stuff, these storms that we get where there's sea level rise and coastal flooding, and then you get rainfall on top of it, and you get compound flooding that's a total mess. Or you get, in the northern neck where you've got a lot of beach and bluff, it's only the fringes that are getting wet, but inland, we're getting a whole lot of rainfall that's flooding these areas out. So we want to better understand it. And I think also moving into the rural areas, we want to better understand where the flooding is in the ditches, because we've been working up in Matthews County for quite a while, and there's ditches up there that when we started working in 2008 were dry, and they're now tidal features. There's Spartina growing in those ditches. And so what we want to do is to start working on that issue, because a lot of those ditches are owned by VDOT, and VDOT may or may not want to deal with those ditches, but they're going to have to. But if we can begin to present the data about where this flooding is occurring, and then with the lateral ditches, where it's taking this flooding inland to communities, I think that's going to be an important piece of this as well.
Skip, that's my argument for the LiDAR data, because at 1 meter, you can't do that unless you can make that, you can't make that argument unless you have that elevation data.
Right. And Frank, you know, what's really interesting, we were talking to folks in Poquoson a few years ago, and because NASA's right next door and NASA was mapping NASA Langley with some extremely precise data, they were actually able to get ditch elevation. I mean, they must have had a vertical error of about a half an inch because of the work that NASA was doing, and they overflew Poquoson and gave them the data. And they were able to start working on their ditches in ways that no other locality in Virginia can.
Well, my last point will be that I hope that the legislature and the last lady, the admiral that we had, advocated for the update of the Atlas 14. And if they don't do that, they should use the Marissa data, because you can do it at the county level. And so this is ridiculous not to be able to use that data. The VDOT has at least looked at a 20% increase on their bridges. So
Yes.
Why in the world are we waiting?
The update of that official data is underway. It's been delayed. We were hoping to get it in the end of 2023, 24 maybe. There are 7 states that have gone together now. From Pennsylvania all the way down to South Carolina, they've asked for the updated data. So we're hoping that with a little congressional pressure, we can speed that process along.
Great.
Yeah, that was all thanks to Admiral Phillips.
Yes, and I hope she stays around.
Awesome. Thank you, Skip, and thank you, Frank. Frank, I know you and I chatted a bit too, and you sent plenty of awesome photos and data, so thanks for coordinating your team down there. I'm gonna switch over to the year-round mapping with tide captains really quick. I'm happy to stay on past 8 if anybody has any remaining questions, or feel free to reach out with emails. If anybody who presented today minds dropping their email in the chat just in case there's a specific question. I just want to be mindful of everyone's time. So I'm going to hand it over to Joe Bouchard, who is one of our tide captains down in Virginia Beach. And it's a good segue as we talk about expanding our mapping efforts into this year-round mapping that we keep talking about. Again, if there's interest in doing some mapping throughout the year, not just around Catch the King, do fill out that form. But I will send it over to Joe, and let me know if you don't have that share screen button at the bottom.
Hang on. Okay. Can everyone see that pathetic excuse for a map?
Yes.
It's a
Okay,
beautiful map.
It is a beautiful map.
I'm gonna just take 5 minutes to show you how I organized my Virginia Beach team. First of all, I have a map of potential mapping sites. This is just Northern Virginia Beach. I have a second one for Southern Virginia Beach and the eastern branch of the Elizabeth River. And all of these places I have personally explored, or my tide mappers have explored. So I know they're good places to map. If it's on private property, I note that. It's in green. But I have mappers that live in those areas and map them. So I offer my team a whole bunch of places they can go map. Okay, next one. Next slide. Oh, I do it. Never mind.
Yep.
Never mind. I thought you were doing it. Okay. And then every month, this is what I prepared for the king tide. Every month, I send them the forecasted time of high tide at a whole bunch of locations. And I tell them, choose the location that's closest to where you want to map and go there at that time. I do this because, we can't, in Virginia Beach, we can't use the Sewell's Point NOAA prediction. And for that matter, we can't use the NOAA predictions for Cape Henry or Lynn Haven at the pilot station there. because the actual time of high tide can vary significantly around the city. So I give them precise estimates, and I go back and validate these annually. And this map shows you that two things. First, the locations where I provide estimates. Now, some of them come from NOAA, where you see the NOAA icon. Where you see the U.S. Geologic Survey icon, they don't do forecasts. They just monitor actual water levels. But that's what I use to make my forecasts. So, for example, in the Lynnhaven estuary in the eastern side, way down at the bottom at Little Neck Creek, there's a U.S. Geologic Survey water level sensor. And I collect the data there and I compare it to two things, to the NOAA forecast for Lynnhaven Inlet and the U.S. Geologic Survey there. And average out the difference. I have to do that because the U.S. Geologic Survey water level sensors can be affected by a lot of things. At Lynnhaven Inlet, even passing boats can give erroneous readings. But if I average it over a long period of time, I get a pretty good estimate of the time difference between Lynnhaven Inlet and Little Neck Creek. And then from there, it's just linear extrapolation for all those sites. And it works pretty good. I have my tide mappers tell me, did it look like high tide? Did I get it right? And I do the same thing along the Atlantic Ocean shoreline and the Chesapeake Bay shoreline. If you'll notice on the central and western branch of the Lynnhaven Inlet or the Lynnhaven estuary, I don't have as many sites where I make predictions. I easily could, but I've had fewer mappers interested in those areas. If I get more mappers who want to map there, then I'll start making predictions for more sites. Now, once I have built this mathematical model, then it's real easy month after month to provide the estimated times of high tide. And as I say, I'll go back and validate it to make sure I'm as accurate as I can be. But anyway, this is the service I provide to the tide mapping team. I give them a large number of suggested places they can map, and I let them know when they need to be there. So their time is spent productively. End of sermon.
You sure you don't want to show the fish photo?
Oh, the fish. Gabi, thank you for reminding me.
Of course.
And that, I think, is a baby striper. It's swimming up 28th Street in Virginia Beach, which was flooded during the king tide. And I think he was headed to the Mojito Cafe, which was about a block up the street from where he was. So that fish wanted to party.
That's awesome.
Hey, Joe, Joe, you were in the Navy, were you?
Indeed, I was. How can you tell?
These streets are getting close to being navigable waterways.
Well, I think the streets in Virginia Beach need to be some kind of marine sanctuary now.
Hey, Joe, I was going to say, I would love to get your map of sampling sites on the Eastern Branch because, like I said, we're trying to expand our efforts to other branches with, different land uses. The Eastern Branch is the one we're going to try to target in the fall.
Okay, was that Margie?
Yeah, it's Margie.
Okay. Sure, I'll send that to you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
You are most welcome.
Thank you so much, Joe. And to recap that, this is an exemplary example of leadership in our tide captains and leading a mapping team. So if this kind of stuff, if you feel like this is something you'd like to do, if you know someone who might be interested in doing these kinds of map leading, we can work on trying to get some kind of toolkit together similar to what Joe has here. So we can provide those resources, or if you're interested in leading it all on your own, let us know. That interest survey is the place. And then I hope Brian Barmore is still on the call. Brian, are you still here?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Would you like to round us out these last couple minutes? Brian is another one of our tide captains with the Master Naturalists on the peninsula. And I got to work closely with him during this past Catch the King. So Brian, go ahead and take it away.
Sure. And I must say, I'm not sure if I'm inspired or overwhelmed by what Joe has put together, but that was very impressive. And actually, Joe, I'll probably reach out to you because one of my things that I think would be really good to have is those lists, particularly publicly accessible places, so that when we get people in, joining, that they have ideas of where to go. Because some people have local neighborhoods and local areas, but many don't. And actually, that's one of the things. So I started as a tide captain back, I guess, in the 2017 one, and have been doing it since then. And we had a group, it was a small group, probably 5 or 6 of us, that would do these ad hoc year-round measurements, particularly when storms were coming in. We'd have some folks go out and map. But what I really saw from that was it either was people that had it very close. I know one guy lived on the beach and he'd go out when he walked his dog and would map that, or I would do the backyard if it got into the backyard or the local park. So it seemed to be people that had it really close and probably also really impacted. And so that's something I'm not sure I have a great solution to, but to try to make sure that we get people, when we're trying to do the year-round mapping, to have places they can go quickly to do it, that's easy for them to get to. So yeah, I think that's kind of the biggest thing that I took away from that was, we had a lot of people involved at the Catch the King tide, but throughout the year it was, a little harder to get people out there every time. I am interested in some of the discussions about things like the roadside drainage ways and things like that. Maybe that's some place where I can also think about trying to encourage people. I know I have one near me where it's basically a runoff drainage into a tidal creek. Most of the time, it kind of stays within its nice bounds. So yeah, at some point after the 4th or 5th mapping of what's basically the edge of the ditch, it doesn't really feel like contributing much by mapping it. But maybe finding other places like that are easily accessible would be good data to provide. And I guess I'll close out Joe's last video, and then I kind of thought about this when Margie was talking about some of the things that happen, stuff that gets in the water, flooding. I don't remember which storm this was, but we're on a marsh here in Hampton, and we went out on our pier during one of the nor'easters or something, and we saw goldfish. So all I can imagine is someone's backyard pond flooded. and they escaped. Imagine there was probably a nice snack for hare in their return or something after that. But yeah, all sorts of things get out into the water when it floods.
If they didn't explode first.
Yeah.
From getting into salt water. Or I guess dehydrate. They would dehydrate.
Wow. Thank you, Brian. Anything else you want to say before I cut you off there?
No, I'm
All
good. Just a big thank you to everyone. I mean, not just the mappers, but everyone who provided this. I put the note in the chat. The VIMS forecast being right here on tidal water, I make frequent use of. So I'm really glad that it's here, and it's impressive the accuracy that Derek showed earlier.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that, one giant, huge, as we've all already said, thank you to everybody on the call, everybody who stuck around for the full 2 hours, and to everybody who presented. I'm really grateful to be part of this team and to have been kind of thrown into the crazy, awesome, wild world of mapping and flood mapping and flood resilience in Virginia. So thank you guys for welcoming me into this space. Like I said, I'm happy to stay on past 8, but I will leave it open for any final remarks from our presenters and welcome anybody to head on out and enjoy the rest of their evening.
Thanks so much, everybody. This has been a great thing. I'm sure that when Dave Mayfield was sitting up there in the pilot noodling on this, he had no idea that that this would be the result. So Joe, we're looking for people crazy enough to go out there in the rain. So that's the next threshold of idiocy we're looking for.
We do it.
I'll do it.
That's what rain gear's for.
Yeah.
It's true. We really appreciate a lot of our year-round mappers that have helped us collect data in those exact types of conditions in past years. Just always be safe while you're out there. Sometimes it's real windy and extra slippery when it's that rainy outside. So boots definitely help. But
Can I ask a procedural question of Joe? Do you use the app for mapping events, or do you set up your own events?
Well, for King Tide, I use the
Not for King Tide. I'm sorry, for year-round mapping. For
year-round mapping, I create my own region, and then each month I create an event.
So you create your own mapping events for your team.
Yes.
Okay. We'll need to try to capture that process too, Gabi.
Definitely.
And we're not going to catch the king year-round mapping events.
I did it just because there wasn't any kind of a year-round region or event.
Right.
And creating a monthly event made it nice and clean. So all the data for the spring tide that month was contained in one event, so I could download it and send it to Derek.
Yeah, and I think that process is going to be good if we target leaders in each mapping area rather than creating our own kind of open-faced monthly mapping things. If we can get in with a tide captain who'd be interested in setting those up, then we can coordinate it that way rather than us trying to create some umbrella thing. But that's a discussion for as we get this ball rolling and some emails out there for some teams.
Yeah, Skip, I don't know what you did for Alfonso when he would go out sampling all the time.
He used to do that. The app was developed to sort of be managed in a decentralized manner. So he was setting his own stuff up once he had the right level of permission. And I think that's probably the way to do it is just create these nodes where people who are trained and competent to a certain level just go, fine, do it.
Then they have a communication relationship with Derek to say, we've got data that you can then go into the database and download.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Or other data users, transportation engineers, whoever. I mean, that's one of the other things we want to do is find, especially as we move into rural areas where there isn't the number of gauges and engineers and modelers as there are in Norfolk and Virginia Beach, is trying to find out, what the basic data needs are and starting to stoke those local governments with this data. I mean, assuming they can use the data layers and have somebody on GIS. I mean, some of these areas we go into and there's nobody nobody doing GIS. So that's why we talked to wherever Tom is on your screen. That's why we talked to Tom about possibly using some of his students to do some of that GIS work as a part of their coursework for some of these rural areas.
Yeah, I'll follow up that. There would be interest, I think, in tabulating or analyzing some of the disconnected areas that are flooding from the aforementioned like extreme rainfall events, where its tidal is contributing to that by, infiltrating the stormwater infrastructure. So like even in Colonial Place, in Norfolk, we see flooding on the interior of the neighborhood, hundreds of feet from the creek, because it's connected under the ground through the stormwater. So if folks are interested in mapping that kind of flooding, that could be helpful to the stormwater management folks. So
yeah, the trick to that is finding some retired Navy fool who
yeah,
all the way from captain to master chief and on down, who's willing to get up off of their butt, put on a slicker, walk out into the rain and fire up an event. I mean, theoretically, you can fire up an event on a moment's notice. I mean, I've set up events and like Margie was saying, Alfonso set up events on his own, I think. Just, anyway, yeah, that's the thing.
I was going to say, when we were doing it earlier, yeah, I would trigger the ones based on storms instead of like Joe was doing every month. But, I would rely on, either the storm prediction, if they came out, or, that guy that lived on the beach, he'd send an email, say, hey, tide's looking really high today. And I'd go make a 3 or 4 day event, and then send an email out and say, hey, anyone that can get out and map during this high tide, go for it. So it is really, really quick to set up and then communicate out that way through the app.
It's true. Karen Jaklich and myself previously were teaching people how to set up their own events. The challenge is that we kind of discouraged people from doing that because they were accidentally setting up their own regions as well, and they were popping up everywhere. So we've never in past training events since like 2017 taught people how to create their own events just for that reason, but it is totally possible, as Brian and Joe and others are doing it all the time. So if there's an incidental event, you don't necessarily have to wait for us to create an event. If you're familiar with the Sea Rising Solutions website, you can even download your own data, and that's how several people will send me their data or email me saying they don't know how to get their data, and I can usually copy and paste the directions of how to do it, and it's pretty handy.
Yeah, we in that 2017 event, we gave everybody too many permissions, and I remember there was one mapper who deleted the entire Norfolk region and all of its data, and it was like, what? I had no idea you could do that.
I wonder whether it might be possible to just once a year, in addition to the scheduled event we have, to take advantage of a fairly predictable, one that's predictable within a few days, sunny day flooding event, and just publicize it with all the folks who have been mapping in the past, and see what kind of participation we have, almost like a bonus event.
Yeah, because those, especially those sunny day events tend to be wind out of the northeast for a couple tide cycles, and those are, I mean, you go to weather.com and you look at the forecast out of, you can pick those up pretty easily. That would be an interesting exercise. I think it also helps because when you have volunteers and mappers, you don't want to let them sit there without doing something for a while, or else they'd sort of wander away. I think it would give them, the mappers, something to do.
There's also multiple king tide events per year. So, it's not just like there's the one that's supposedly the highest, but usually there's 2 or 3 more.
Yeah, in fact, it generally, the one we've been picking is not generally the highest.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's ever been the highest, but that's what I was thinking, is that we might be able to actually get even more valuable data if we have people sort of at the ready, to go out with a few days' notice. Particularly the sunny day things seem to be, the ones that grab a lot of attention.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. It's safe to say we should all head on out. I
I
think
think
so.
my beer is cold.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thanks, everybody.
I had a lot of fun. This was awesome.
Thank you, Gabby. You did a great job.
Later.
Thanks.
Yep. Good job.
All right. Talk to everybody
Take care.
soon.
Great to see everyone.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.